Welcome. My name's George Perkovich. I'm a Vice President for Studies here at the Carnegie Endowment, and it's my pleasure, real pleasure, to welcome all of you here this afternoon and to welcome our distinguished guests and colleagues. I want to start before I get into the topical introduction and also to appreciate the cooperation with FICCI in this project and its leadership, Amit and Rajana, and President, obviously, Rajan Mittal. It's great to collaborate with FICCI, and we look forward to doing more of this in the future. I also want to give special thanks to Her Excellency Meera Shankar, Ambassador of India, for joining us. And will, in advance and then at the appropriate time, also thank Her Excellency Amina Ali, Ambassador of the African Union Mission to the United States, who is en route. There's weather and other lots of construction around in the neighborhood, so she's en route, should be here in a minute, but we did not want to delay the proceedings further, so we're going ahead and starting now. I will say just very brief introductory remarks beyond what I just said, extremely brief. But then Rajan, I think, has a couple of introductory remarks he wants to make as well. And then we'll turn it over to my colleague and friend Eduardo Zepeda, who will moderate the first session. Eduardo got in this morning from Africa. I got in over the weekend from Pakistan, so his jet lag's probably worse than mine. Others of you have traveled. I hope none of us faints, because we understand that we need to hydrate when taking long trips and then performing on panels here in Washington. The topic that we're addressing is there's an inverse relationship between its importance and the amount of attention really that's often paid in this town to Africa's development and to the role of leading outside powers in facilitating or hindering that development. In recent years, I think President Bush did this, Secretary Clinton have focused more attention on Africa, certainly at the state level, and more can be done. And now India, in particular Indian business, and Rajan is a great representative of that trend, is paying more attention to Africa, doing more work in Africa. And so the question arises kind of at the state level: can the U.S. and India, as very important external actors, potential external actors in Africa, collaborate, coordinate, at least mutually inform each other in developing their strategies and policies in relation to Africa? Obviously, business will do things based on commercial logic, but there's lots of work that states can do and state policy can do to help channel that. And so that's the important topic that we're here to address today. And like I say, I think you'll agree we have absolutely outstanding pair of panels, really, with practitioners from the private sector, from government, who can shed light on this important topic. So we are going to proceed with two panels. Like I said, my colleague Eduardo Zepeda, who's a senior associate here at the Carnegie Endowment, will chair the first. Eduardo has a major research project in Africa, and also one that is nearing completion on labor in India, employment in India. So he's particularly suited for this topic today. The second panel will be moderated by Dr. Amit Mitra, who is the Secretary General of FICCI, and who, to anybody who works in and on India, is a legendary figure. He befittingly was awarded in 2008 the Padma Shri Award by the President of India. The bios, I think, are here. As I say, he's a legendary figure in these parts, and so he will be running the second session. Let me then stand down and turn it over to Eduardo with the understanding that when the ambassador comes in, she'll just slide in effortlessly to the seat in the panel here, and so we'll just work in
we can just talk
order there.
here, no?
What's that, Ambassador?
Would you like us to speak from here itself?
Let me ask
I think that
the
might
audience
be
if
better, no?
it's fine with me and it's nice and informal, but the question is, if the presenters present from here, can you all see them?
No.
Clear answer.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarity. So then we're going to ask people to come to the podium. Rajan, if you don't mind further introducing us, and then we'll turn it over to Eduardo, but you come up here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As it has been decided that we all need to be standing up here at the podium, I will be short and brief. While I see my colleague, which has just come back from Africa, as I've been told, as I call it, hot from the oven, with my company acquiring an African asset of $11 billion, probably I'm in the oven. So we'll have to figure that out a little later as we go along. But this is a good discussion platform that we are picking up. How can India, US collaborate to see that the continent which is out there can get adequate resources? What has been, till date, India has been doing with Africa? India, Africa have very historical political ties that runs in centuries and extremely knowledgeable ties, closer ties, and of course, economic ties. Yet, India has not been able to really penetrate in this continent for its own resource crunch. India has been building its own economy. Not only that, we have to realize that there has been not much of action on government-to-government basis. It is really the private sector which is going to start moving in that direction. That needle is going to only move when the private sector moves in. Challenges are huge. I'm sure there are much more experts here who will speak about the challenges in that continent. But trust me, it's kind of an opportunity which comes once in a lifetime. I have traveled around before we acquired the company. I traveled around for a failed merger, as I call it, but I traveled enough to understand the dynamics of the continent. People, and I can tell you, I come from a country which has its own challenges, which can be tough at times. Even considering that, when we went to Africa, people used to say, "Are you sure? Do you want to go into that continent?" And I think that's somewhere I believe that people don't have the knowledge. People have not traveled enough in the continent to understand what kind of opportunity that can provide. And especially companies like us, which are in infrastructure and telecoms in particularly, and the business model which India has developed. And if we don't go in touch for 1 billion people which sits in that continent, it's not going to be fair. Because at the end of the day, the innovation, at the end of the day, low-cost innovation moreover, if it is not going to be proliferated in continent which has this kind of population, I think we are not doing justice to the whole business model that we have been able to develop. India-Africa, the trade is almost about $40 billion. US-Africa is about $77 billion. Over a period of time, we have invested almost $9 billion, and I understand from the figures, US is more like $36, $37 billion. It's not that this continent is not getting enough traction or not getting enough money. Is it the point of discussion today, and I hope that even the next panel takes it, is the continent doing enough with the resources that it is getting? Are there issues that need to be addressed? Sure enough, inadequate infrastructure remains an issue. Governance model remains an issue. Security, I have to say, remains also an issue. One has to realize that when you step in there, because of economic growth, wherever the economic propensity will happen, you need to have security for your people, for your assets, and I think that's important. Other issue is really the regulations. It's important for regulators to be in place because when the billions of dollars are being invested, one has to be very sure that you're on a firm footing as far as the regulation is concerned. The good part is the great learning is happening. We went through that process. The engagement between the two countries is clearly showing that that process is moving ahead. India and Africa summits have happened where we have gone and spoken on governance issues. We have gone and spoken on agriculture issues. ITech, which has been part of the human resource capital, is being built where we are training people on skill development, on education. And I see that one of our Asian neighbors is now hugely investing in that country. I think US has a role to play in many issues for the development of that continent. US has high technology, high innovation. That's the greatness and the great platform that this country sits on. How can it kind of collaborate with India? India is a kind of a country which will provide you low cost, converting that innovation into commercialization, into monetization. But we all have to understand it has to be done on a low cost basis. Healthcare is a big challenge, even countries like US in that sense. But with the generic drug pharma companies in India have done a great service within the country and also in the African countries. A $4 program which Walmart launches in India is at the back in US is at the back of what is being produced in countries like India. So there is enough for a collaboration to happen between the two nations. We have to realize that that's the next frontier. It will have its challenges, but trust me, if you have passed through the Indian trajectory, you are quite ready to do that. I've had a couple of meetings of friends here. We both do realize that we need to collaborate. We need to bring the companies on a kind of a platform which will allow them to go invest. And I'm quite very sure that this deliberation that they are taking place here, and you can see from the sense that Ambassador herself is here, that must show that the importance that India attaches to this continent, and it attaches the importance that Indo-US relationship in that sense will put this into the next level. So let me leave the experts to have more discussion on this. I wanted to give in a flavor from a company which has gone in and done and acquired a company for almost $11 billion, 42 million customers. Prices are very high, I can tell you. Networks are not that good. And if India can provide it 1 cent a minute, of course, is a subject matter of debate that can we play a role even in US. I'll leave that topic when I speak on US relationship. But sure enough, we can. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
When shortly after we here at Carnegie, we did an event on the Millennium Development Goals, and Rajana approached me to discuss the possibility of doing an event to get into the issue of the US and India and Africa. I immediately jumped to it because I think it's really a strategic issue that is emerging. It has a very interesting component, which is a country, India, that has its own problems, but it has great potentialities with a huge, massive knowledge-based and appropriate technology characteristics. Also, is featuring very important innovations in social policies that are going to be of much use in Africa. And the economic environment and investment environment is really crucial. So I think this is a very important discussion. I think it's a discussion that looks at the future. $30 billion is a significant amount, but it's not very big. To really pull things up, the scale has to increase. So we're looking into the future, and this is that's why I'm so enthusiastic, and that's why Carnegie is very enthusiastic about this discussion, and looking forward into the developments of it. I'm not going to take more time. You came to listen to our speakers. So I will introduce our first speaker, Ambassador Mira Shankar. She came to Washington, D.C. About a little bit about 1 year, a couple of months ago. And prior to that was ambassador to Germany from 2005 to 2009. And prior to that was held the responsibilities to the United Nations and the International Security Council. I imagine. Well, I'm not going to take it. The bio will be very, very long. So I leave with you, Mira Shankar. Please, can you come to the podium?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here at this initiative, and as mentioned by Rajan, it reflects the importance that India attaches to its relationship with Africa. It's a relationship which is of long standing. Historically, we've had trade links, particularly with East Africa, which have been quite close. More recently, we were joined in our struggle against colonialism. And indeed, the Indian freedom struggle owes much to Africa, because Mahatma Gandhi's political consciousness was attained during his struggle against apartheid and what he considered the unjust pass laws in South Africa. It was there that he honed his whole strategy of non-violent civil resistance. And so this was something which was very much dear to Indians when we became independent. We were amongst the forefront of those countries who sought to change the apartheid regime. We had a diplomatic boycott of South Africa, no trade, no aid, no linkages. And as part of our overall policy approach of solidarity with emerging independent countries, we fashioned, even though we were very poor ourselves, a program of technical assistance which focused on capacity building, and a large part of this was focused on Africa. Today, of course, we have reoriented the relationship to current day priorities, particularly to working together to meet Africa's development aspirations. We held the India-Africa Forum Summit in April 2008, which had two major documents by way of outcomes. One was the Delhi Declaration, which was a political document which set out a largely shared vision of the world, particularly the need to democratize the institutions of international governance, including the Security Council and the institutions of international financial governance. And the second was an Africa-India framework for cooperation. And this set out priority sectors in which we intended to engage with Africa as part of our development cooperation. And these sectors cover most sectors of interest to Africa, including human resources development, education, capacity building, improving agricultural productivity, food security, industrial growth, focusing especially on small, medium, and micro enterprises, health, communications, and IT. I think apart from this, India offered duty-free preferences to the least developed countries. And this, in a sense, was a special benefit to Africa because so many of the least developed countries are there. And this means that we can import goods from Africa, from the least developed countries, largely duty-free. In fact, it covers 94% of the tariff line, so it's a fairly extensive duty preference that we've given to the African countries. We've seen our trade expand, as Rajiv mentioned. from Rajan mentioned, from roughly around 3 billion to around 40 billion in 2008. So that's a fairly substantial leap in our trade in the last, say, 6 to 7 years. We've also greatly expanded our development assistance program, both in terms of lines of credit that we are offering and in terms of grants and aid that we offer to Africa. The lines of credit that we've extended over the previous 5 years have been in the region of about 2 billion, but we've decided to double it to about 5.4 billion for the next 5 years, which means roughly $1.1 billion a year. And this credit will be used primarily for building infrastructure, including railways, IT, telecom, power generation, physical connectivity, and of course, agriculture and food security. Some of this will also go towards capacity building. We've also doubled our grants in aid to about $500 million to Africa. And we've also expanded the training slots that we provide from 1,100 slots to about 1,600. And similarly, we've doubled the number of long-term scholarships that we provide for Africa. One interesting initiative that we've taken is the Pan-Africa e-network, which we announced. And this will provide, this was announced in 2004, and will connect 53 countries by a satellite and fiber optic network, and is expected to be completed by the end of this year. The first phase, covering 12 countries, was inaugurated in February. The purpose of this is not only to have connectivity, but also the wherewithal to encourage both telemedicine and teleeducation, overcoming or leapfrogging some of the problems of distance in Africa and of providing these facilities. Now, this is just to give you a kind of bird's eye view of the way in which India has been substantially increasing its engagement with Africa, and our private sector is also looking at Africa. I know that sometimes there is a sense that, when you look at Africa, you're looking at dilemmas or challenges, but I think it's also important to look at the potential, and we have to take into account the fact that after Asia, Africa is now the second fastest growing region in the world. In the decade up to 2008, Africa as a whole has grown on an average by 5 to 6%. And even with the global economic crisis, it has still managed to sustain growth, even though growth has moderated, and will be something like 3.8%, I think, in 2010, and 4.6% next year. But which speaks to the potential there is for growth in Africa. It has a population of 1 billion, which is likely to grow to 2 billion by 2025, thereby providing a huge and expanding market. And as the middle class in Africa grows, with greater economic growth, the demand for goods and services is only going to increase. It's a continent with enormous natural resources, and increasingly we are seeing political consolidation and improvements in governance, which augur well for the future. As far as India is concerned, I think what we bring to the table with regard to Africa is our own experience as a developing country that has sought to pursue the path of development in a democratic framework and within a highly pluralistic society and polity. Many of the solutions that we have developed or the policies that we have applied in India have relevance for Africa. For instance, in agriculture, the emergence of self-help groups or microcredit to fill the gap in terms of the lack of institutional finance or credit for farmers is something which would have lessons for Africa and be a very valuable tool for Africa's development. The manner in which India was able to evolve from a country which was dependent on food aid at the time of independence to a country which has largely achieved self-sufficiency in food grain production in close collaboration with the US through what was termed the Green Revolution, using high-yielding varieties of wheat seeds and modern technology to improve agricultural yields. And later, of course, this was extended to rice with new high-yielding varieties of rice which evolved. Can we look at applying and sharing some of this experience with Africa? Because this shows that even when you have challenges in terms of agricultural productivity, it is possible to make that leap in productivity which can lead to prosperity for countries there. Then in terms of education and capacity building, again, this is an area where we've had historical links with Africa. Many African leaders have studied in India, and we continue to have a very large capacity building and scholarship program for Africa. So that's something, again, where we could certainly work together with Africa for mutual benefit. And in terms of technology, what I think Mr. Mittal mentioned, the Indian market, because it's highly price sensitive, has driven the kind of production and service efficiencies in terms of pricing, which would have relevance for the African market. When I used to talk to my German friends in Germany about their cars, and I said, your cars are over-engineered for the Indian market because we don't need such sophisticated cars. We need modern technology, which is efficient, reliable, clean, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be that sophisticated because the Indian market is very price sensitive. Something like the Nano, which emerged in the Indian market, shows that you can produce goods which will find a market, but they have to respond to market conditions in a particular locale. And this development of what in India is called frugal engineering, low-cost, high-tech products, is something which could have relevance and be appropriate for Africa in terms of technology sharing. And I think the final thing that I would say is that as India's own requirements for goods and services grow, we will import more from Africa, and that will also be an engine of growth within Africa. We've seen trade grow. We import a lot in terms of say, for instance, gold. India, for whatever reason, is one of the highest consumers of gold in the world, and so we are one of the largest importers from Africa, or diamonds, or ores, or even agricultural products. To take one example, it's not happened as yet, but it's something which could happen. India, because we are vegetarian, pulses form a very large portion of our diet. And when there's a bad harvest in India, or in Myanmar, or just 1 or 2, 3 countries which produce pulses, there's a huge rise in prices in India. But Africa has the wherewithal to grow pulses, and it would be a source of protein within Africa. And if they were to sell it to the Indian market, there would be a huge ready-made market. So that's the kind of thing with potential, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think there are a number of other crops which African farmers could grow, which would be, which would have relevance for the African requirements, and the surplus would be available for sale to India. So I think that the potential is huge. as we look towards what India and the US can do together, I know we've had some discussions on this at the government level. And I think what we have said is that while we would continue our own government programs on a bilateral basis with Africa, perhaps what could be considered is, if the US wanted to use Indian experts for some of their programs or have training within India, etc. That's the kind of thing in which perhaps we could make a beginning in working together. So as we move ahead, as we acquire confidence, I think we will be able to then see what are the other areas that we could work together on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This morning, as I was taking the bus, transportation, exactly, I had that impression. We don't need this type of buses all over in Dakar. They wouldn't fit in the street to begin with. So, yeah, technology, appropriate technology is really important. Let me introduce to you Mr. Suresh Kumar. Suresh Kumar was nominated by President Obama and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Director General for the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service at the U.S. Department of Commerce. As Assistant Secretary and Director General, Mr. Kumar leads the U.S. Foreign and Foreign Commercial Service. Has over 30 years experience in international business as a consultant, coaching and teaching management education. He has led global businesses for major US corporations. He headed the worldwide consumer pharmaceutical business of Johnson & Johnson and served on the corporation's group operating committee. Has extensive bio that I'm not going to read. I invited you to listen to his remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you to the Carnegie Endowment and FICCI for this invitation to join you today. As we heard, several of you have just returned from Africa. I would hope it's South Africa. For those of us who love soccer, we still need to know who is winning and who is not. But we in America, those of us who like soccer, just absolutely love Africa. A few months ago, we almost beat Brazil there. And a few days ago, we tied with England, and we have every hope that we will go very far. But, football and soccer aside, Africa is 53 countries. It is over 700 million consumers. It is 1.6 trillion in GDP, a GDP which nears that of Brazil and Russia. In terms of growth, the ambassador just referenced, it is growing at 5%. No one can ignore those facts. No one can ignore the potential and the challenges of reaching that GDP across 53 countries. And some, in a more granular fashion, have done that, and I congratulate you, Rajan, for the deal. Businesses create a framework in which employment can be created and prosperity realized. Governments create a framework for businesses to engage. And this is the dialogue. How can Africa create a framework to attract investment, attract bilateral trade, and indeed multilateral trade, and do so from India and do so from the US? President Obama made it very clear that he intends to vigorously support economic engagement in Africa. He did so in a speech in Ghana. Africa is a continent which has seen significant amount of visits, and this is more than visits, to explore and see what we can engage constructively in. Post the president's visit, Secretary Clinton was in Africa across several countries. And just last week, Vice President Biden returned from a trip to Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. So the engagement is at very high levels within the U.S. government, and this is a function of our commitment to Africa. I am here, of course, in a slightly different capacity to share with you what an effective engagement strategy in Africa can be and how it is addressed through the President's National Export Initiative. It's something my shop, the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, stewards and shepherds. And the NEI is impacting three critical areas of international trade: trade promotion and advocacy. Second, availability of credit and financing. And third, free and fair access to foreign markets. The U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service is largely responsible for the first prong of the NEI, advocacy and trade promotion. Our core mission is to strengthen the competitiveness of industry by promoting U.S. exports and providing commercial diplomacy and advocacy support for U.S. business interests around the world. As we do that, we strive towards a win-win situation whereby we can create jobs both at home here as also in the areas where we trade with our partners abroad. As Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Director General, I lead a team of over 1,500 trade specialists spread across 109 cities domestically here, who interface with businesses here and encourage them to engage in places such as Africa. And they dovetail with 126 commercial offices across the world in our embassies to provide what we call soup to nuts solutions. Within Africa, we are located in Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. Besides, through our partners at the U.S. Department of State, we cover all the other countries where we do not have a physical presence. So to ensure that we can connect entrepreneurs in either country so that trade could be progressed. Our offices serve as a one-stop shop for U.S. exporters to provide a comprehensive toolkit, anything from matchmaking to advocacy, but also from market research to physical engagement, including working on commercial diplomacy issues such as the regulatory reforms required. Our goal is always to enhance competition and set a situation where commercial entities could engage. If we look at the way trade is managed, often the question comes with reference to free trade agreements. We had initiated one on those lines with some countries in South Africa, which later moved on to become what is called TIDCA, or the Trade, Investment, and Development Cooperative Agreement, which was signed in July 2008, covering countries of Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, and Swaziland. How do we then encourage? We have these mechanisms in place, we have an organization in place, we have the beginnings of a cooperative agreement on trade in place. On a more granular level, we have trade missions wherein we take companies from this country to Africa and connect them through our matchmaking services with companies there. In fact, the first trade mission that I led in my position was to Senegal and South Africa. Just over the next 12 months, we have trade missions which are planned to Nigeria and also beyond to Morocco and Egypt. Over and above this, we have mechanisms in place to get buyers and companies from Africa into this country to meet with potential sellers of products and services and technologies which are adaptable and make sense for that continent. We call that program the International Buyers Program, and several of them are also on the cards just for next year. The implementation of the National Export Initiative by the Department of Commerce in the Africa context is not without its unique challenges. Africa is 3 times bigger than the continental United States, but it is, as I mentioned, divided into 50 nations. To be trade-friendly, African countries must harmonize tariffs. They must encourage the free flow of products through its various ports. We need to go not only the fiber optic infrastructure, which the ambassador alluded to, but also into the physical road and port corridor infrastructure, which needs to be developed to make trade possible. And above all, we believe there is a need for transparent trade policies and processes which encourage businesses to invest and move forward. Notwithstanding these challenges, some of our Africa-specific trade expansion plans will be to continue to promote trade shows in Africa and to highlight the growth and opportunity in the market. Besides, we will pursue tendering opportunities on behalf of American enterprise. We will work with our South African and SACU government colleagues to implement TITCA. We will step our cooperation with other agencies within the U.S. government, particularly the Export-Import Bank, OPIC, or the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and the Trade and Development Agency. We will also put special emphasis on agriculture productivity and green industries, as there is so much potential in these 2 sectors. We will continue to work with franchise and direct selling associations to try to stimulate entrepreneurship and new business formation in Africa. Just on that, with franchising, there are 700 U.S. companies which have a presence in South Africa alone. And together, they employ more South Africans than any other country's companies. So if you look at it, U.S. engagement has been there. U.S. engagement has not only been there, but has been vibrant. And U.S. trade policy is moving forward to encourage continued engagement and further growth in trade. If you reflect back, ours has been a strategy which has straddled aid to trade. We believe it is the right thing to do. Through the Millennium Corporation here, we have focused on infrastructure development. I'm not going to go into individual numbers, but the investments have been significant. Through USAID, capacity building has been effected and put in place across a number of countries. Through the TDA, feasibility studies and encouraging and influencing companies to engage early on has been established. Through financing mechanisms, through the Exim Bank, the SBA, and OPIC, SBA in this country, OPIC and Exim outside, buyer guarantees have been put in place so that buyers of our products and services in Africa could avail themselves of the critical credit necessary to move trade. Besides, AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, has been something which has been in place for several years and only extended. This provides access to U.S. markets for African exporters. South Africa alone availed of it in 2008 of $3.9 billion of exports to this country. Interestingly, in the global village that we live in, German cars made in South Africa were brought in to the U.S. through the AGOA process. And these were the BMW 3 Series, the Mercedes C-Class, and so on. Only to give you that AGOA is a composite act which has brought into this country manufactured products as also commodities and furthermore handicrafts. Africa's 700 million people deserve access to U.S. products, services, and technologies, as do America's 300 million consumers in terms of access to African products. This administration is committed to trade with Africa, and all the bilateral agreements which we've been exploring and the arrangements we have in place point exactly to that. We see Africa as a great opportunity waiting to happen. A 5% growth rate, which the ambassador referenced, is wonderful. It's second only to Asia. We believe Africa will be a major trading partner to the U.S. in the days to come. Thank you very much.
Indeed, there is a large scope for augmenting the economic ties and the trade ties of the U.S. with the African continent. We have been studying here at the Trade, Equity, and Development Program the issues, and that's something that always comes up importantly, and the role of AGOA has played in exports of Africa has been very important. And it's crucial that the details of how those goods get to the U.S. be worked out very well so they can continue to do so in the future. Let me introduce to you Amina Esali, who is an extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador to the United States of America of the African Union. I happened to listen to one of her presentations about 2 months ago, just down the road, in which she was presenting her strong views about the important role of education in the development of the economies, and particularly in the development and the economic future of Africa. Without further ado, I'll handle the microphone to Amina. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to really apologize for coming late because I had other function at the State Department. But I'm happy at least I'm not very late. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate today in this important forum. And it is very, very close to my heart. I am an African, and I represent African Union. So I have a very challenging task today, but I'll try to express myself so that I will represent our views as African, and also I would also try to give the feeling of Africans in terms of our cooperation with India, and also our collaboration with US. As African, my colleague have taken a lot of time to speak about the attribute and the current situation of Africa, and how we can really gather our energy to be able to support Africa. As you know, Africa, we had really came from a very difficult situation. And for the last 20 years, we were really moving very well. And 3 years ago, we went down in terms of our economic performance. And right now, we are really feeling we are moving toward the right direction. So in that respect, Africa, I would like to use an example of a beautiful woman who has all the attribute to get a very good husband. And we have our partners who all look to Africa with various interests. And Africans, through African Union and African leadership, They came down, they discussed this and come out with a new position, which emphasized, first of all, for our partner to recognize the African agenda, what Africa needs, what Africa realizes is important for her own development, what we can get from our partners to benefit both Africans and our partners. So there is a lot of discussion, a lot of debate going on in Africa towards what sort of program we would like to pursue and what sort of priority we have. We want to ask our partners to help us. So in that respect, there were two major initiatives that happened, took place in Africa. The first one was transformation of OAU to African Union. As you know, we were under OAU. At that time, we were more or less preoccupied with the political issues, with all those challenges that we had. So in 2001, we sit down and reflect and took into consideration the changing economic environment and the need of Africans really to look into possibility to be able to have sustained and balanced development, and very strong, sustainable, and balanced development for our people. So then we transform OAU into African Union. We put emphasis towards integration, mostly economic integration and political integration. At the same time, the second initiative that we undertake in Africa was to establish NEPAD. NEPAD is a program that was created by the Africans, leaders, to be able to address the issue that we faced at that time. And when we talk about African agenda, we really emphasize the program that was outlined in NEPAD to be able to enable Africa to overcome the challenge that we are facing. So according to the NEPAD program, we have realized several attributes that Africa right now have that will really enable our partners to consider. And if you look at the practical side, we would like our partners to look Africa as in terms of business, in terms of investment. And when I say in terms of investment, because of several reasons. Of course, my colleague said, talk about population. Population is huge, and it really has a tremendous implication for business, especially investment, for policymakers, as well as for bilateral partners, in terms of taking advantage of population of Africa, which is now we've already closed 1 billion. We will be close to India. We'll be not far from China. It's a challenge, and it's an opportunity. Also, we are seeing emergence of middle class. Right now in Africa, we have between 300 to 400 million middle class population that has huge spending power. This is also a business opportunity for investment to consider. At the same time, as you know, Africa, we have a very high population of young people. I think this is the only continent in the world that really has a high percentage of young people. If you compare to other continents that we have aging population, which is creating problems to other economy. So because of the huge, this young population, of course they have their demands. For instance, the demands for education is quite huge. Universities, all sorts of levels of education, demands for health, demands for clothing, demands for them to be entertained and leisure. It really creates tremendous opportunity in business terms. It's there for investors really to take advantage. And then in terms of requirement for development, especially infrastructure, energy, information technology, and other areas, really these are also an untapped business potential. So when we talk about supporting Africa, there are some areas I think we should look into those areas seriously and ask ourselves to what extent we can really empower Africa to really come out of their own difficulties. We have gone from depending on AIDS or ODA or such, but we are emphasizing on getting more FDI. And we have seen for the last few years there was a lot of increase of FDI from outside towards Africa. The exception was these 2 years when we saw financial difficulties. But we believe, again, that in terms of investment, we are going to see more investment, especially in the private portfolio flows and also in the direct investment as such. Now, in terms of the program that we have, I would like to talk about 2 programs which are very important. And I will later on speak about the difference between how the Americans are looking towards African development and how Indians are looking towards African development. They have a different approach. And I would like to talk about this approach because then it will enable us to see to what extent we can bring the smart partnership between Africa, India, and America. Now, with NEPAD, we have African Action Plan programs. And these programs are agriculture, food security, infrastructure, water and sanitation, ICT, energy, transport, human resources, science, technology, trade and market access, and then, of course, share value, this is governance, gender development, capacity building, environment, and climate change. Those are the action plan that we are pursuing at this material time. And in terms of NEPAD, we have seen the major challenge that Africa faces is infrastructure development in different aspects. When you talk about marine transport, talk about railway, road, and all those facets of transportation. So we have come out with a program for infrastructure development in Africa, PIDA. This is a program which is a program between ADB, African countries, African Union, ECA, and our bilateral partners. And in this program, we have what we call trans road highway. These are like a super highway that will enable to connect Africa, as far as in terms of the continent connectivity. So in this super highway, we have also included a road network, energy power network, ICT, marine network, railway, and other sort of infrastructure programs. So I think what we are asking from our partners is to look into those programs so that these are the major programs for Africa. That will open up Africa. It will enable Africa to connect among our countries, at the same time to facilitate export from Africa to other countries. So in our approach, both India and the US, we are trying to involve Indian companies and American companies to look into those fundamental issues like building capacity, especially by giving us support to build our infrastructural network. And then we have agriculture program, which is CADA. This is also a major program for Africa because we would like to attain food self-sufficiency and food security within a short period. There is a possibility we can do that. We need a lot of support from our partners. Now, let me briefly talk about the relation between India and Africa, and our own feeling towards the program that we undertake between India and Africa. My colleague, Ambassador, she explained in detail about what we have. But I think historically, as you know, India and Africa, we are very close. Even Prime Minister Nehru, he said, although we are separated by the Indian Ocean, but still, in a sense, we are like neighbors. But what we value from India, our Indian relation with Africa, because they've understood our needs. Our needs is to help us to answer the question. For instance, number one, in infrastructure. In our bilateral agreement, infrastructure is there, and it has been given all the importance. As well as in education, capacity building, and in financing of our trade. So in that respect, between India and Africa, we see a lot of possibility to be able to move towards a higher level of cooperation. Now, with respect to U.S., we have a very good fraternal relation. We have got a lot of agreement, and we have really worked so hard to be able to bring our partnership to a higher level. And I would just like to talk about AGOA because this is a major initiative that will enable Africa to be able to overcome our problem and to be able to access American market. But as you know, AGOA, there's a debate between not only here in Africa, here in America, within the scholars, within the civic societies, that we can do better for AGOA because for the last all these years, we think that it's a missed opportunity. Why? Because AGOA need to really be investment friendly. AGOA should also be able to also look into regional program, regional integration program. AGOA should also not be tempered with political issues. For instance, when the government falls and then the investors will also challenge. These are the things that really I feel that we need to really go again and look into AGOA and try to reformulate and bring it to a higher level. Now,
there is a cellular phone or a BlackBerry that is causing the interference. Can you please turn it off?
Okay. So in that respect, we should look between AGOA and other program from the U.S. and other program from India. What I would like to say that I'm seeing a deliberate decision and commitment from the Indian government to really to push their private sector and to really invest in Africa. And in terms of from the American side, we are trying to convince the administration to also look into support to regional program, to give support towards infrastructure program, to also support in terms of capacity building, training, and also to help African to support and to give them funds or support for aids for trade. And another aspect I would like just to say, the emergency situation between now in Africa, what we are seeing in Africa now for the last few years. And the emergency situation we are seeing in Africa, there is a lot of involvement of Indian private sector. And recently, I'll give you an example. Recently, there was a deal whereby Bharat Airtel, which is a phone company from India, managed to buy out Kuwait Zain, and now this company is one of the biggest telephone company in Africa that has asset of 10.7 billion, and this is number 5th telephone company in the world.
It's good to hear.
I'm happy to see him because there was a question in Tanzania when they asked about who bought the Zen, but the answer was very positive, so I'm very happy. And this is an example where we see a lot of investment from India going to Tanzania. We have to Africa. We have all those good companies going to Africa, and I think in America we can do much more. We can also promote our private companies to be able to invest in Africa. I want to conclude my remark. Unfortunately, the time was too short for me, by saying that there is opportunity. There is opportunity. There is the potential for a smart partnership between Africa, India, and US. The reason is because from India, we have a lot of experts who are trained from India, including myself, who are there in Africa. So these are the assets that we can use. At the same time, because of the diaspora, Indian diaspora, who are both in America and in Africa, they can be additional asset to be able to work with American companies. What is required is commitment from both government to be able to have a sort of a program to be able to include, to strategize to what extent we can have a tripartite arrangement whereby maybe we can finance from America and expertise from India and using the diaspora and experts who are Indian trained to be able to give the expertise and to work for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Amina, you raised a large number of important issues that I'm sure I'm going to come up in the session in the Q&A session. Let me introduce to you Donald Yamamoto. He is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. State Department and has a deep knowledge, a long experience with working with African issues. He was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs from 2003 to 2006. He was also a U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia and also a U.S. ambassador to Djibouti and deputy director for East African Affairs from 1998 to 2000. So we have a long experience and deep knowledge of Africa that we look very much to learn from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and especially to Madam Ambassador and to the Carnegie. Just a few brief comments and open it to Q&As is, right now we have about 53 embassies and consulates in sub-Saharan Africa, and those numbers are going to increase as we administer and try to implement what President Obama told us and laid out a vision for us back in Ghana last year. Some of the issues that we're looking at too is looking at how our embassies and consulates can do things differently in order to promote and advance not only our strategic national interests, but also help, as Assistant Secretary Kumar was saying, trade and investment and other opportunities. Number one in the pillar for President Obama is really good governance and democratic values and stability within the African continent. And in that context, we can have promotion of trade and investment. Some of the problems that we face on the continent has been the coups in 5 different countries, particularly in Madagascar, as one example, where here was a model for MCC and also AGOA, yet because of the coups and the problems, they lost 100,000 jobs, but that also affected other countries from Lesotho to Swaziland to other parts in southern Africa. And so what we're trying to do is create an environment and work with our African partners, particularly the African Union and other institutions and organizations, to ensure that there is stability and opportunities for development. One thing that we're looking at our embassies is to look at opportunities that are transcending beyond in all the countries. I'll give you one example. When we look at golfers from Tiger Woods to others, they're wearing African leather. Or if we're looking at textiles coming in from Africa, the issue is of branding and also of promotion of how you get their wares out into the markets. We're looking at 2 areas that are of critical importance. First is regulatory, the other is investment. On the regulatory side is how do you guarantee and promote and protect the resources of Africa, not only through the Kimberley process on the diamonds, but through conflict minerals in the Congo. On the investment side, as you know, we have about $8 billion in trade and investments and assistance into Africa. But in order to make those work, we need to have the U.S. government cohesive and coordinating and operating. In the last month or so, for the first time in my memory, we had all the U.S. agencies together in one roof from OPEC, TDA, Commerce, AID, the American Chambers, et cetera, working together and coordinating to look at a strategy for Africa. And so those are areas and issues that we need to look at very carefully. The other thing, too, is to look at, on the African continent, how can we play a role to promote the trade and investment? In that context, there are two areas that we're looking at carefully, and that is looking at banking, telecom, energy, and investment sectors to liberalize and open. The other issue, too, is what Secretary Clinton said the other day, is on a go to make it work, we need to increase and enhance interstate and intertrade trading capacity. Right now, we only have a 10% interstate trade. That's way too low compared to NAFTA or the EU. So finally, just to kind of conclude this, is that we're also looking at other examples. Right now, we started a bilateral discussions with Egypt, China, Japan, the African Union. We're looking at strategic dialogues with South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, and also in Ethiopia. Upcoming is Brazil and India. Why? Because they matter. They do a significant trade in the continent, and we can learn from them and build on those issues. So without further ado, I open to our expert panels and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are running late. It's time for coffee, but we are going to have a session of Q&A, and then after that, I'm sure we're going to get the coffee. If you can please identify yourself and place a short question. Yeah, the gentleman here.
Hello. I'd like to ask a question about the philosophy of investing in Africa. One of the points of contention between the United States and China was that the United States, a lot of their investment has social and political strings attached to them in terms of human rights and rule of law, things of this sort that Mr. Yamamoto alluded to a little bit in his talk. And I was wondering, since India, of course, geographically is so close to Africa, it's going to play such a big role, what is this philosophy? Is it going to be the Chinese philosophy of basically non-interference, very few strings attached to its infrastructural development, other investments in Africa, or is it going to be more leaning toward the United States type of philosophy of having strings attached, political and social strings attached to their investment and aid?
I would say it would lean to the Indian model, neither the US nor the Chinese. I think the Indian model has been sensitive to Africa's development aspirations, and it has tried to work with Africa's priorities, even as we try to promote political stability and capacity building and good governance. But we do it in a quiet way.
Okay, there is a sharp question and a sharp answer. But let's take other questions. We'll try to pull them together. And yeah, on the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Pumela, and I'm from South Africa. And I just want to make a couple of comments. One to Secretary Kumar to say that you will be pleased to learn that Starbucks has now been added to the 700 list of franchises that are in South Africa, and that it mainly came from South Africans themselves demanding that there must be a Starbucks set up in South Africa. Due to the fact that they travel a lot, and when they come to the US, they come to Starbucks. So 2 weeks ago, we were very happy that there's a Starbucks. And I'd also just like to make a few comments to the panel at large, both the US and India, to say that I see intellectual capital, or the build of intellectual capital and the build of economic capital as being key, to the development goals, for example, of this panel, and the key to ensuring that the interventions that have been made today are actually sustainable. And for those companies who, after the FDI and trade missions, manage to invest in Africa as a whole, I think that it's key that they also see that corporate social responsibility or corporate social investment is not just a PR exercise. They need to change by ensuring that corporate social responsibility really changes the lives of the people at grassroots, because as developing as Africa is, there is still a large gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Another one is for the moderator. It's very difficult to interrupt such an eloquent comments and questions, but I would ask you the following to be brief. We are running now out of time, unfortunately. Yeah, there was the gentleman.
Bill Green, International Trade Commission. I have just a quick question. Could you identify the two telecom companies that have merged in the Indian company and the African company?
Well, the Indian company is Bharti Airtel, and the African asset that we have bought is Zen Telecom, which was held by Kuwaiti group. They are interested in Africa and Middle East. So we have taken the portion of the African side. Middle East still remains with them.
Okay.
There are 15 countries. I can give you the list post this, otherwise it will take far too long.
That's another short question and a short answer. The lady in green?
I don't know if it's a short answer, but it's a short question.
The answer is not sure. We will leave it to later. Okay.
I'm Karen Dubin. I'm in the U.S. Foreign and Commercial Service. In fact, this young man here, Mr. Kumar, is my boss, and I was on trade mission with him to Senegal and South Africa. And my immediate question is, how can we reconcile the two driving forces currently that we face in our organization and maybe across the board, which are the NEI and the need to be in Africa in terms of exports? They seem in some cases to be conflicting. I mean, doubling exports as part of the NEI seems in some way contradictory to trade with Africa because it's a evolving process and pieces of it are nation building, and so I'm struggling with that, and some of my colleagues at Commerce are also doing so.
Okay, we will then we will ask the panel to address the comments and the final question. We will go on the reverse order. Mr. Donald?
You know, one of our primary purposes is how do you attract and trade and investment in Africa? How do we make it supportive and nurturing to the investors? And one of the problems that we have with American corporations right now is that the issue is financing, the issue is support for the American companies as they enter the market, the issue is advocacy, and those are issues and areas that we need to work on very aggressively. We're looking at our colleagues from India and China. They're creating an environment for their companies and corporations that if we don't adopt and be flexible, we can see American banks and companies shut out of the market. And so we need to be much more aggressive, much more responsive. And I think that's why we're having meetings with our colleagues from India and China, because they have a lot of answers that they can help us and we can, in partnership, work on in Africa.
Thank you very much. Amina?
I think I would just like to answer the question from the last one with respect to how do we reconcile exporting. And I would like to also add from what Ambassador Yamamoto left. And maybe we should also look into entrepreneurship development, because most of the business people in Africa, they are more small and medium type of entrepreneur. So how do we really promote this sort of entrepreneurship to the higher level? That's the challenge. And the entrepreneurship development is very key for Africa. We are just recently seeing a lot of confidence from business community in Africa that they are connecting with their business partners outside, especially in ventures like in cut flowers, in textile, and in some other areas. This is a recent phenomenon, but still there's a need to really build up capacity for entrepreneurship development. So to transform the petty traders and to be able now to interact with business community from outside. This is very key.
Thank you very much. Suresh?
Thank you. First of all, not only Starbucks, I love Nando's in this country, so thank you so much. Trade is always a two-way street. We've never forgotten that, so thank you from that point of view. As I understood the second question, how do you reconcile growth? I don't think there is a reconciliation, and let me try to express. First, there is, if I understood the question, how do you invest in a continent there on the continent, as opposed to just exporting from here. And there may be just two different ways to do it. And let me give you examples of infrastructure and examples of the desire of American companies to engage on the investment platform. Westinghouse, with clean nuclear power for power projects across and electrification in the continent of Africa, or General Electric for that matter, just in terms of shared investments. In terms of exporting, there have been any number of small and medium enterprises and large companies from this country exporting. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at overall global trade, Africa's size of trade compared to global trade is still small. So doubling on a small base is not a challenge. We see, particularly given a growth factor in Africa, which you heard earlier today as being 5% and more, is somewhat more than what the developed world is actually experiencing. So doubling of not only trade is across the world is possible, but we see in an interconnected world, certainly Africa has the potential to more than double. So I think, and the last point I'll make is, not only going back to South Africa and the 700 companies which I talked about there are several companies I've been associated in my past. Whether you look at healthcare companies, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, so on and so forth, they're already there. So American companies have been there, and the ambassador from AU mentioned that there is an emerging middle class in Africa coming. And as that emerging middle class consumes more, growth eventually happens there. So I think we see that as a two-pronged approach, exporting from here and investing there, and both are prone to grow right now.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Mira?
Well, I think as far as India is concerned, we'll continue to intensify our engagement with Africa. We are happy that some of our private sector companies have started engaging, because in the long run, that will be the sustainable basis for an economic partnership model. Somebody talked of corporate responsibility. We would hope that Indian companies would follow a model of corporate responsibility. I think one way in which we are distinct from the Chinese projects, because this was raised earlier, is that we largely employ African labor. That's our policy, that we use local resources for working to the extent possible, including local people for local workers on the projects. We don't import, wholesale workers from India who come and work there. We do it only to the extent that we don't find adequate local expertise in a particular field. So it's a totally different philosophy. And I think our philosophy has always been that we should be in tune with the development aspirations of Africa, and we should try to help them build capacities in a way which will play to their long-term strength and development.
Well, let me invite you to the following session, in which we are going to address the business practices. Also invite you to have coffee. Please do it in 5 minutes, and invite you to join me in thanking our wonderful panel.